I am here with Patrick Colucci. And Patrick, I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
want to say, A, welcome and thank you for coming on the podcast. And B, I just want to share that the way I met Patrick is that I was volunteering with one of my daughters at the Peace Fair, and we started talking, and you have the most amazing life story that I was like, he needs to come on the podcast. And then after talking to you, Patrick, you have such a very, like, you need your own podcast because you don't just have one life story. You've had such a rich, full, interesting life, I have to say.
Well, part of that's because I'm so old.
I thought you were going to say part of that is because you're so interesting.
No,
Well,
I've experienced a lot, and I love to share what I've learned because I've learned quite a bit. And I came from pretty humble beginnings, and I grew up in post-World War II America, right into the American dream in Westchester County, New York, on a small subsistence farm that my grandmother had since the 20s. And I grew up a little bit of a recluse because we were on a farm, we weren't in town, and my friends were the animals and the trees and nature, and that's what I communicated with. And I was a little afraid initially to integrate my life with society at large. I knew my place. It was all about a world that was very conservative. We had this American dream concept where if you worked hard and didn't rock the boat, that you would be successful and that you would have a wonderful, however, it wasn't exactly the way they described it. You might say that, I was maybe on the autistic spectrum or close to it. There was no diagnosis, but I was very sensitive when I first started meeting people. And I had a problem with dyslexia, so I didn't start to read till a little later than most people. And a little bit of agra, when you're afraid to go out of your house. What's that called?
yeah, I think that is agoraphobia. I think, yeah, you're right.
Agoraphobia. I had panic attacks. I was afraid to walk down the street, so forth and so on. Now, I came from a very strict family. They were Italian. Their parents were immigrants. So I was a grandchild of immigrant grandparents, I guess,
From Italy, right?
from Italy, both sides. And there was no Italian spoken in the house. The idea was that we were going to be Americans and we were going to show resilience and we were going to integrate into this wonderful society. Problem was, we were a minority and we were in a Northern European hamlet. I don't think there were any Black people there until much later on when I went into college. And it was very conservative and it was black and white and it was oppressive to a great degree. You had to show strict allegiance to authority, any authority, anyone that wore a uniform, a dog catcher, a milkman. He was an adult and you had to do whatever they directed you to do. So it took me a while because I was from a large family. My parents, I said, they weren't afraid of corporal punishment, let's put it that way. And most parents back then weren't. So I was miserable as a kid. I was pretty miserable up until about 10 years old, other than the times that I could escape with the animals and I could walk through the woods that surrounded me and I could listen to the trees as they talked to me. And I was very integrated into that part of my life. But I had this notion that I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what this was all about and what I was supposed to do and what was my place. So anyway, I was invited to Vacation Bible School in Tarrytown one day. And I walked in and I heard the kids singing this song that they had joy, joy, joy down in their hearts.
I remember
Oh
that song.
my God, that's wonderful. How can they be so happy? So I went in and it was my first introduction to a beautiful story about salvation and future and so forth and so on, and a way to live. And I remember walking out into the courtyard on that hot summer day, and the sun was coming through the trees. And I had clarity. I had a connection. After all that wonderful good news I heard, I said, hey, this is a great way to live. I could live this way, and it has meaning. And so that was the beginning of my spiritual journey. And then shortly thereafter, I got the idea, well, if I want to embrace this and I want to help people, which I very much did, and I saw the world as a ball of confusion, I said, this is a good way to do it. I'm going to study for the priesthood. And at 12 years old, I made the decision to lock myself away in the rectory, hours a day, helping out the priests, a quiet place to study. Went to a Catholic high school in White Plains, very academic, sharpened my skills, and went into the seminary at age 18.
Can I ask you real quick, Patrick, if your family raised you in that Catholic environment, or if this Bible school was like your first introduction?
The Bible school was, and that's what jolted them out of their lethargy. Once they saw I had an interest, they got a little guilty, and they said, wow, we belong to a church. We don't never go. Let's bring Pat to church and see what he thinks. Now, the church scared me the first time because they spoke in a foreign language, Latin way back then. And everybody was sort of uptight, and they asked for money a lot. And I didn't get the same reaction. So it took me a while to understand what was going on. But then I immersed myself in it. The mysticism, the Latin, I learned it. The feeling of a connection with a higher power was definitely there, motivating me. So what happened next was I met someone. I was in the rectory working, and I was a typical nerd. Pocket protector, high water pants, pointy shoes, and I had these books laid out all over the table I was working on. There's a knock at the door. I open the door, this strapping young 20-year-old guy walks in with hair to his shoulders. He was actually a hippie before it became fashionable. He walks right in with his German Shepherd. I'm saying, who the heck is this guy? So I said, who are you? And he said, well, I'm here to, where's father? I said, well, he's not in. Well, I'm here to cut the hedges. And he says, who are you? And I told him who I was. And I said, I go to Stepanak High School, and I'm telling you, look at what I'm doing. And he said, what are you doing with all this material? I said, I'm studying about the Middle Ages, and I'm studying about the feudal system. And his name was, I said, Frank, this was fantastic back then. They had everything dialed in. There was a hierarchy. There was a king. There was vassals. There were knights. There were serfs. Everybody had their place. Isn't that wonderful? And he looked at me and he said, kid, because he was a couple of years older than me, are you out of, I won't use the exact words he used, are you out of your damn mind? Do you know what's going on in the world?
Wow.
I said, what do you mean? He says, people are being hosed in the street. Cities are burning, and this country is ready to blow up. You see it on the news every night, and you're in here studying about the feudal system, and you think you're going to help people? So make a long story short, Frank and I became very good friends. He started to introduce me to the counterculture. For a conservative kid, this was pretty wild in the beginning.
How do you define counterculture? Because it's one of those terms that, we all hear about the counterculture, but what is that? What does that mean to you?
All right, well, let me explain it to you. Back then in 1960, whatever, I went to school with a tie, a white shirt, blue blazer, and I sat at the table, I said my prayers, I was very respectful. And there was a whole host of people that were saying, what is this BS about the American dream? How can you be into freedom and how can you be into God and other things when there's racism and inequality? These were people that were bringing this up right out in the open. I mean, this was stuff you didn't talk, you were almost embarrassed to talk about. And you saw it every day. It was on television. It bothered you then you started to realize, well, gee, I'm in this institution that's supposed to have answers, and the answers aren't there.
Wow.
They seem to be missing the boat. And it seemed to be that these people that started to protest and started to look at life totally different, not the nuclear family, free love, accepting everyone for who they were, peace, brother. The acceptance part is what really grabbed me. There was a camaraderie there. Everybody that was young and in that group that I met in Tarrytown, New York at the time, which was close to where I lived, they were cool. They were cool people, and they seemed to like each other. And there was no division. You see, I crossed over several boundaries. When I was a kid at 5 or 6 or 10, up to then, there were gangs still. People fought a lot. At the corner store, there were turfs, there was this, there was that going on. This was a whole new way of looking at your fellow man. And the acceptance really grabbed me. And I started to have doubts about whether I was in the right place to be as effective as I could be. And trying to figure out who I was and was this really my purpose? And spending hours in school, putting question marks in my columns of my books because I couldn't figure it out. And Frank and I began to walk through Rockefeller's estate. He had a couple dogs, and we would walk the dogs, and we would be philosophical, ragtag philosophers trying to figure out what this big mess was in between us. He was on the periphery on one end, I was on the periphery on the other, because he was into nature and he wasn't fully accepted yet by the hippie mainstream people because, oh, he's weird, he walks in the woods with his dogs. But he was into the nature part. But Frank was a very deep thinker and very strong-willed. And I'll tell you something that'll probably, you won't understand right away. But at age 19, he had a vasectomy. I said, oh my God, are you out of your mind? He told me about it before it happened. But he was so into that the world was a bad place to bring up kids that he went at age 19. I totally was against it. I tried to talk him out of it.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. So anyway, we spent a lot of time together. We traded ideas, and there was an overlap. After a while, I became a little like him, and he became a little like me. There was something that happened in the middle. As a matter of fact, I got to know him so well that when we were out in public, I'd finish his sentences. But I really admired him, and I loved him because he was the first person that was honest with me. And that was important to me. Here was a guy that wasn't bullshitting me. He lived what he believed. He had these values. I might not agree with all of them, but he told me where it was at in his mind. So anyway, so this caused confusion because what do I do now? Do I leave the seminary? I've been studying from 12 years old. Now I'm 18, and I'm hanging around in this different environment on weekends and on vacations and going back and putting my cassock on and saying my Latin and so forth during the year. And one day I'm sitting in Tarrytown on a park bench, North Tarrytown, and it just got to be too much. It was like a burden. I could feel it was coming to a head. I didn't know how to address it. There was a lot of guilt. And I said, God, I gotta ask you something. I prayed to God, what should I do? I had 2 years of college seminary done by this time. I'm up to 20 years old. Okay, went in at 18, now I'm 20. What do I do, Lord? Do I quit? I don't know that I'm fit to be an instrument the way you want me to be it. And the church, I'm not sure it's running the way you want it to run. And all the institutions, we shook them pretty bad. We shook the government and we shook every type of institutions there were to their foundations. The problem was we didn't replace them with anything. So here I am, and I pray to God, what do you want me to do? Give me a sign. And I look down on the park bench, there's a newspaper, and I checked the ad. There's an ad for this. What's going on in upstate New York? God, they have a peace festival. I wonder what this is about. So as I'm reading it, a 17-year-old girl that I had seen once or twice in town, hey, you're reading about Woodstock. We're all going up this weekend. We got a caravan, and you can come with us, but we have no room for you. You got that old beater of a motorcycle. If you want to follow us, fine. So I decide, yeah, let me go. Let me go and discern what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. Thank you, Lord. So it's sort of funny. So we're going up the New York Thruway that Friday, and I see thousands of cars going in the same direction, peace signs, just young people laughing, peace, brother, yelling out. I said, wow, this is like a party. We get stuck in that major traffic jam. And I'm sitting there for about an hour, and that caravan's in front of me. And I notice that that same girl gets out of the car a few cars up. She steps out, wide bell bottoms, no shoes, long hair to her shoulders. And I said, man, you know what? Let me ride up to her. So I rode up and I said, hey, you know what? Why should we sit here any longer? I have this motorcycle. Let me ride you in. And we'll wait for your girlfriend at the entrance. Girlfriend never made it. After 3 hours, we decide we're going in together. She had $60 in her pocket, which was a blessing because I had $2, and I didn't know how I was going to. I bought with $2. I bought a bottle of booze for her. We go in, and we go over the hill and look down, and there's this mass of humanity, almost a 500,000 people in front of me on this vertical hill. And on stage, Richie Havens is singing Freedom, and the sun's coming through the clouds. And here I am with a motorcycle, a bottle of wine, a pretty girl, and 500,000 unsupervised kids my age.
Wow.
So it was like a tremendous rush of euphoria because I had been dialed down all my life. And I suddenly realized, my God, there's other people that feel the same way I do about the war, about their connection with each other. This is really crazy. This is, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here. And thank you, Lord, you know? And I said, there's a message here. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to figure it out. And it began. And it was just one event after the other. And Maria was with me. We realized we weren't going to find the friends. I went up to the front a million times with a note, please, you know, meet us, because they had all my gear. They had my clothes, they had my food, they had everything I threw in the trunk to give her a ride. I never connected with again. So anyway, Maria and I went through the whole Woodstock scene together. The mud, the music, the whole bit. The one thing that stands out is that on Saturday night, there was a haze coming off. It was dark, and there was a haze coming off from the rain, and Sly and the Family Stone were on, and they sang their set. It was dark, and all of a sudden, strobe lights are hitting the audience, and they light up the stage, and the horns and the brass and all of that. And these guys just made the place go crazy. And they got to the song, I Want to Take You Higher. And that was really significant because for me, the message I was getting is not higher in the drug sense, but higher in the sense of consciousness, that we're all in this together, that we're all equal, that we're all brothers and sisters. And it was such a tremendous feeling. And I said to myself, I belong here. I belong with these people. I won't be a priest, but maybe this is a royal priesthood here that I can join. Yeah. So anyway, we went through the whole concert. The rain was horrendous. We sat in the mud, but you get to know somebody after 3 days, believe me, sitting in the mud. And she was a person that listened and commented, but she, for a 17-year-old girl, was way beyond what I would have expected in maturity. And I told her about my angst, and we talked about life and the direction the country was going in, and how we were watching our friends come back in body bags on TV in color every night, and there had to be a change. We had to stop the war, and so forth and so on. So I took Maria home on the third day, that Monday. We got on the bike. The bike was, it was a wreck. It had ball tires. The chain popped the sprocket a few times. I had put a bicycle handlebars, high handlebars on it from a bicycle because I didn't have regular handlebars. And every time I fell over in those days, I'd have to pull it apart. And that was often. Anyway, this is what we drove 100 miles home.
Wow.
So there again, somebody was watching. Yeah. So So anyway, I dropped her off on the corner, and I'll never forget it because I said to her, look, I said, we've been through a lot together. What we experienced was what was later described as the three most peaceful days ever in history by Time magazine. I said, well, it was incredible what we experienced together. And I know you got the same vibe, but I'm going back to the seminary. And it was like, yeah. I said, yes, I'm going back. My parents, my parish, I got to give it one more try. I'm going to go back. She said, meet me here in 10 days. If you meet me here in 10 days, I'm going to give you something to keep you safe on that motorcycle you ride because I'm concerned. I said, okay. So she showed up, and 10 days later, on June 28th, 1969, she had a little box in her hand. And I said, what's that? She said, open it. Well, what she had in that box was this St. Christopher's medal. I don't know if you can see it.
I can see it.
Okay. And on the back of it, she wrote, Love Always Maria, August 28th, 1969. That was so impactful. No one ever gave me a gift that I can remember, and something so meaningful. So I didn't have a chain. I put it in my pocket, and I went back to the seminary. And I really tried to bring what I learned at Woodstock and integrate it into the seminary, but nobody was having anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And I made the very hard decision in my junior year, mid-year, to quit. Everybody else hung in there until graduation, and then they quit. But I said, no, I can't live a lie. If I wasn't meant to do this, I'm not going to stay here. And then I transferred over to, the University of New York, the system, the public system they had, Lehman College. So, and finished while she worked. But anyway, so what happened was I come back to Tarrytown a year, 9 months later, for her high school graduation. And she turned 18, which was sort of cool. And we spent her graduation together. But then I'm going to digress a bit, okay, if I can.
Sure. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I just want to interject.
Yes.
Where did that questioning come from? Because it sounds like your background was so structured.
Yes.
But I find it really interesting that you were wondering about purpose and where do you fit? And
yes, the structure wasn't doing it for me.
Yeah, and you just recognized that.
The structure scared me, actually, as a child. When I would go into a library as a child, I would be overwhelmed. It was just too austere. Any building, a government building, I felt a restraint, and I was bridling against it. I was trying to have resilience and to fit in, but I knew I couldn't fit in. There was something wrong with me, I thought. I knew I was different from other people. These panic attacks I had weren't normal. I was able to associate with people initially, but it was hard. And I questioned, well, is this all there is? I mean, you go to work, you work hard, and you die. I mean, I couldn't get the real reason. I just didn't know.
Like, why am I here? That's fascinating. That is really interesting that you weren't satisfied with this. You had a feeling that there was something bigger, and you were kind of on a quest.
My first connection was when I went to that Baptist Bible study, and I felt God's presence for the first time. And I realized that there was something beyond this, that there was a greater power than what I was seeing. And what I was looking at, it was like I was in a movie, but I was observing it even though I was in it. Okay.
I get that. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, you went to her graduation, and then you're going to take a right turn from there.
Yes. I went to her graduation, and what happened after Woodstock, I got closer to the other side. I spent time in the town of Woodstock. Frank had gone up there, built a cabin, and he invited me up a year before that to meet a Father Francis, who was a hermit that lived on a mountain outside the town of Woodstock, which was 2 miles up.
Was this during that 9-month period or that you're talking about, or did you go back to Woodstock after Maria's graduation?
Both.
Both. Okay.
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 So I had met him earlier. He was on the mountain. He had a wooden building that a church that was very rustic and small. And Frank was hitchhiking through there, and it was cold. He was with his dog. It was about 10 degrees out around Christmas. And he went into the church, opened the door, it was open, and he was in there huddling, freezing. And this old caretaker walked in. The caretaker had a plaid shirt, and he looked like a gardener or something. He said, "What are you doing in here?" He said, "Well, I was going through the woods. I'm freezing. Can I lay down here? Can I stay inside?" He says, "What is this place?" He says, "Well, it's the Church of Christ on the Mountain in Woodstock." He said, "An old hermit came up here 50 years ago as a recluse, but he's a very smart man, speaks 7 different languages." So Frank says, "He must be a nut," he says to the guy. He says, "Well, he's a little eccentric." The guy leaves, 20 minutes, he comes back in his clerical robes. He's the bishop. So they make an agreement. Frank moves in, fixes up the rectory and so forth. And I get a letter at the seminary. "Pat, I met Father Francis. He wants to talk to you about Vatican II, blah, blah, blah." So I went up there to meet him. And I remember he came out of the church on top of the mountain, and he's standing there, a silhouette, 6-footer, a very English demeanor and speech. And I said, "Oh, Your Eminence." He says, "Don't call me that. Call me Father Francis." I said, "Okay." We go in for tea. Frank goes away, and he picks up the cassock where he had the tea tray on, and he's got dials. And he starts twisting the dials, and the bells on the entire mountain start to ring. It was so surreal. So anyway, Frank brought him into the town of Woodstock, and at 82, he began his second ministry as a hippie priest of Woodstock. So that weekend I met him. I'm sitting on his porch. He says to me, "You know, Pat, you got another 8 years to go in that seminary you're in. I'm a bishop. I could ordain you, cut out the time, and if you promise to take over the church, I'll give you the church." And I mean, what? It was like, oh my God, this guy, wants to do that. And I said, "But I can't. It's not, to me, it wasn't orthodox. It wasn't the right thing to do." So we had a casual relationship ever since then. So anyway, Altamont happened. The whole scene started to change. Okay. The bloom was off the rose. And my generation was starting to realize that, hey, when your parents kick you out and you got to eat, and maybe you get a spouse and kids, you got to get a job. And we realized we woke up, survival.
Yeah.
So everybody went into survival mode, and we went into industry and different things, and we infiltrated all over. But many of us became exactly what we despised. We just bought into it 100%.
Yeah.
So anyway, getting back to Maria, I went to her high school graduation in May, and that following June, I married her. We got married in Tarrytown, and we're still together today, 55 years later. She was my soulmate. She was meant to be for me. And ever since that day I met her, I knew there was something special about her. So anyway, 10 years after Woodstock, she buys me a new motorcycle. Pretty cool. And I'm working in the car industry at this point. And I drive up to Woodstock. I redid the trip in my mind. I get up there on my new motorcycle, my new Triumph, and I'm looking around. There's nothing there. The field is empty. I go into town and I said, "What's going on? There's no brass band. It's 10 years. And their answer was, "Get the F out of here. We hate you hippies." The town hated us. You destroyed our property. You came up. You trampled our gardens. I said, "But you don't understand. There was something very special that happened here. Get out." And I drove 100 miles home on that bike with tears in my eyes. So it wasn't until 1984 when Wayne Sayward put up that monument that's up there now, It's a big 3-ton monument with the names of the bands that played, and said, this is where it happened in 1969, right here. For the first time, it was given credibility. And we were ecstatic because now there was a marker in the ground. Up until that time, none of the media, the papers, nobody would even mention it anymore. And so now finally, people started coming from all around the world. Today, if you go into a school and ask a grammar school kid what Woodstock was, they're more likely to know what it was. Back then,
Oh, there are college classes that teach
right,
classes on Woodstock.
that took a while for that to catch on. And when that monument was made, the mythology took hold. And then a few years later, Bethel Woods moved in, made a museum. But in the meantime, I got friendly with a man named Artie Kornfeld, who was one of the 4 producers that put that thing together. At age 25, he was made vice president of Capitol Records. He came out of a blue-collar family in Long Island and made vice president and moved into Fifth Avenue penthouse because he was in charge of everything for Capitol Records. And it was his idea and Michael Lang and Artie's wife to do a concert in Woodstock, and then it unfolded. So I speak to him a lot. He, for me, was the one guy out of the 4 that really maintained the spirit of Woodstock, what it was all about. And what it was all about, and still is all about, is the accepting other people for who they are, their value, that we're all in this together. We're all brothers and sisters, and we all need to help each other because that's what life is. And how well do you do that? You know, I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. And he was the one that really promoted that side of it. And that's why I love him and speak to him till this day.
What was your relationship with music before Woodstock? Because when you tell the story, the way that you reference the music is almost so much a part of the story. Were you passionate about music?
Let me explain what music was in the 50s, the 60s. It was our voice. Society was so repressive that musicians were the only ones that could say what we felt openly in their songs. And their songs all had a message. And the message was pretty much against the establishment. So the music, as a young person, hearing about, you know, social issues and the war and stuff like that, it really affected us. And then for me, when I was a young kid, I got a plastic record player, which was a 45. And the only record I had was from The Doors. There was one song, Riders on the Storm. So I played that over and over. And I said, that's me. I'm a rider on the storm.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And that just grabbed me. And it was like, you know, I could do a scene where I'm laying there with short hair and listening to this for a couple of years. And the hair is growing. Getting into it, you know. But anyway, so the music back then had a message. It had a meaning. It was the best music in the world. And that concert gathered together some of the most prominent people that gave that message. Melanie, Janis Joplin, you know, all the greats. But there was one problem. I noticed that they left out some names on that monument. There were 28 bands listed on those plaques. 4 were left off. The reason they were left off was because they weren't associated with Warner Brothers, and there were some disputes. They weren't put in the movie, and they were cut out. So the guy that did the monument was working on memory. There was no internet. There were no phones back then. And he put the names together thinking he got everybody, but he didn't. So I started a petition a couple of years ago to get that corrected because, you know, it was the right thing to do. And I wanted to put the 4 producers on there. They're missing, Artie and Michael and the other 2. They should be on there. And Max Yazgers, whose farm it was on, originally the sculptor had his name on there, but the people that owned the property at the time said to him, unless you take Max Yazgers' name off and put our name on there, give you the
Mm.
$600. When I heard that story.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got 1,500 signatures, and we got Arlo Guthrie to back us. And we met with Bethel Woods, and we're in the process of researching how we can do this. Okay. So anyway, what happened was I went into the car business. That was my way to put food on the table. I didn't know what to
Yeah.
do. So I walked into a dealership, very green and naive, a high pressure outfit in Tarrytown, New York. I knew nothing about business or car sales or anything else. And I walked in and I put my prayer books down and I picked up the gals books, the car books, the appraisal
There's
books.
a replacement.
So anyway, what happened was there were 10 franchises in one building. And I said, well, how am I going to learn these? He says, there's a magazine rack back there with brochures in it. You got 2 days to read all the 50, 60 models that we have in this one showroom. And then you're on the floor. And so I still had these inferiority complexes. I'm saying to myself, I got to eat. I'm shitting. I'm afraid. I don't know how to talk to a lawyer. I was 23 years old. I
Oh
don't
my
know how to
gosh.
talk to a doctor. Little by little, however, I got proficient. I got very good at it. I became a top salesman after quite a struggle. I remember that I had worked my way into assistant manager on the new car floor. And one day, a customer came in and we had Jaguars. We had everything from Chrysler, Plymouth, Renault, Peugeot, Volvo, MG Triumph, Jaguar, TVR, Mazda in one shot. And it was crazy. So anyway, guy comes in. He says, I want to buy that Jaguar. First thing on a Saturday, one that was on the floor. And I said, all right, come into my office. Now, back then, everybody smoked. I mean, the customer smoked. We smoked. The sales manager smoked. There was a haze in the showroom. I was smoking 2 packs a day. And anyway, this guy sits down. He plucks $1,000 on my table. And I should have been happy. All right. I'm 2 years in, and I should have been happy. Still got me there.
Yep.
So all of a sudden, I'm watching the cigarette smoke from the end of the cigarette come towards me. And it turns green and it hits me in the forehead. And all of a sudden, I start to shake and tremble and sweat. And I didn't know what was wrong. I was actually having a breakdown because every night I would go home with my stomach in a knot for 2 years because they were training me how to sell to people, how to write up a contract so it was ironclad, how to really cheat people. Okay.
Yeah.
And it was going totally against
That's so
everything.
integral to who you are. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Wow.
there was even a point where they had the phones tapped. Okay.
Yeah.
They could listen in on what people were saying. And so, I mean,
Wow.
it's just not a good environment. So I got up and I went over to my sales manager and said, you're going to have to finish this. He says, what's the matter? I said, I don't know. And a force literally pushed me out of the showroom door.
Wow.
It was like a wind. And I collapsed in a big polyester heap on the sidewalk. I'll never forget it. And I had tears running down my face. And I got up and tried to go in. And that same force pushed me all the way up the sidewalk. And I kept going and I kept going until I hit a telephone pole 3 blocks up and I collapsed. And I was crying. I didn't know why. Went back to the showroom after about 2 hours. The general manager, who's sort of like a mentor, takes me in the back and he says, what's the matter? He said, you're not going to get violent, are you? I said, no. He said, I know what's wrong with you. I said, what? He says, you have executive syndrome. I said, what's that? He says, you are so damn intensive and so worried that if you miss a sale, that you're going to get fired. You think that you're not doing a good job, but you're doing the best job of any salesman I have. You got to realize something. This is not a life and death struggle. This is a game. I said, what do you mean a game? He said, the customer knows it's a game. The customer knows that He's got to negotiate for the best price so he has food left on the table for his family and he doesn't overspend. That's his part. But your part is you're an employee. You have to make the most you can so that you got a dealership to come back to and a job. So that's the game. So lighten up and play it as a game. So he gave me a weekend off, and I went to Maria. I said, Maria, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to do. Should I quit? Should I not? She said, stick to it, see what happens. I said, all right, I'm going to go in and try to do it the way you want. I go in, my sales start going through the roof. And I realized I had a real talent, and I took the guilt out, and I was very effective. So my career lasted 50 years, not in the same place, 10 years in that place. But I gravitated towards the new way of selling because it was so much like me. Customer satisfaction. Listen to the customer. He'll tell you everything that you need to know to make the sale. Your job is to justify his decision. He needs that moral comfort from you to say, yes, this is why this is a good decision, and you're making a good decision for your family and for yourself. And once I got that concept, my career just blossomed. I mean,
Wow.
I became managers in different places. I had 10, 15 salespeople at a time. I taught them my system of selling, listening, low key, maybe a firm hand and a soft glove, because I knew how to close.
Right.
That's why I wrote the book, The Closer's Song, named my book that I wrote, my novel, The Closer's Song, because I was the guy that came in and got the job done. But I did it in such a unique, soft sell that people loved me. And so what was happening was I was gaining repeat sales, friends, family members. It was just incredible. I couldn't believe how well it was working. But I had enough of management. And finally, I went into sales. I said, you know what? I've been managing guys. I've been closing deals. Why don't I do it for myself? Take all the stress from upper management off my back, and let me just go one-to-one with people and see what happens. So I took a sales job in Montgomeryville with a Honda dealer, and they were such nice people. They were grandfathered in from the late 1800s. They sold farm implements and then went into cars. And now they had this Honda dealership. And I started working that system, and it just exploded. And so a couple of years before I retired, which was about 4 years ago, I had made it into the top 150 of 17,000 Honda salesmen in the United States in volume.
Wow.
And also customer satisfaction. One year I won an award, and I didn't even know I won it. I had a 99.8 year run for customer satisfaction. So I found that it's really important to accept people for no matter what you do in life. If people know you're authentic, if they know that you're not just thinking about making a quick buck, that you're there to help them in the same way they're helping you, it's a whole different world. But in the meantime, what had happened before I got to that part, I embraced the me generation, the overconsumptiveness, the bigger houses, the bigger cars. I had become, for a long time, really dialed into money, sadly to say. And all those values that I had from the 60s, they were gone, but they were still there deep down. It was causing such a division that I was heading towards reckoning of some kind. I knew it was coming, and I was drinking heavy and trying to lay the fear. And I finally realized that there was something missing, that I was falling into that dark void, and that if life was only about making money, then it was empty. And I realized that addictions in life that you have, whatever they be, sex, drugs, booze, anything that becomes a negative addiction, is always followed by periods of pain and suffering, which was enlightening to me. And then I realized the higher the highs, because you get high at one point, you need more, you need more. The higher those highs go, the deeper the depression on the other end. And so it's a short circuit you develop in your mind, and you become a captive to this. So what happened was, in the 90s, I moved down from New York to Pennsylvania. I bought my dream house, beautiful in Yardley, a beautiful town, a colonial brick front, the whole bit. I had it about a year, and then the recession hit. I was a Cherry Hill Mercedes sales manager. I thought I had arrived at the pinnacle of my car career. I was only halfway in at that point. And I lost everything. I lost the house. I lost all my savings. And I was devastated. I was angry. I even called up my accountant. I said, cash me out on the first 2 or 3 houses I bought. I'm paying my capital gains. I was crazy. I want to pay my capital gains. I'll never buy a house again.
Right.
And anyway, so I got a job at a place I really didn't like because I had to pay these bills. I put somebody in my house, an executive from Crown Cork and Seal, and they had a beautiful family, and they maintained my house, and they showed it 70 times before it got sold. And I went and moved into an apartment. I went from a 3,000 square foot house to a 400-foot apartment. And I was crashing. But then I said to myself, Pat, it's not you, man. There's something else. You know there's something else. So I went into my garage. I got out an old weight set. I had a plastic weight set, and I could barely pick up 40 pounds. And I said, I'm going to work it out with this weight set. And every day I went in a little bit more, a little bit more. After a few months, it's 150 pounds. And I kept going.
Wow.
And little by little, you know, I looked around, I found that Honda job. And that Honda job, when I took the job, I said to the owner, I don't want to be a manager. I don't want to be in meetings. I don't want to have any decisions. I just want to be the best salesperson that I can be. And if you let me do that, I will be a good fit for you. And I was the only salesman in that store when I first started that won Salesman of the Month through first 3 months in a row.
Wow.
Because I just did what I knew had to be done the right way, you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, you know, there's so many things I want to discuss, but I don't want to prolong it too long. Let's get through this. I took you from my childhood. I got connected to you because I love the idea that you were discussing immigration, and you had a beautiful daughter there with you, and you had a beautiful boy there with you. And I said, wow, immigration, somebody cares about these people. And we started to talk. And then I said, look, this is a nation of immigrants. We're all immigrants. We all came here from somewhere else. And even though these people are coming through the border, they're people, okay? Some of them, maybe we should screen better. I'll agree with that. However, these are human beings. They have the same hopes and aspirations that we do. Why shouldn't they be given the same chances? Being Italian in Westchester, New York in the 50s was tough. I was in an Irish, English place with one or two Italian families. So I had to be resilient, and I had to figure out a way to overcompensate and show that I was worthy to assimilate. And that's what I did. But a lot of these people are not getting that chance, and they deserve it. So anyway, I came to the realization that I use Facebook as a blog. Every day I get on,
Oh, nice.
I put something positive on there, whether it be something that I have experienced or something that I think people should do or pay attention to. And these things, these ideals that we had from the 60s, these ideals are not just that, they're actions that we should take every day. And I really feel that we should take them together, everyone. And
Yeah.
I remember the days when, as a young person, I would walk down the street and I'd see another young person like me, and I'd say, "Peace, brother." I didn't know who he was, but there was that going on.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that come back. I really would.
Yeah.
Um, we've got to stop being self-centered. This all started in the Garden of Eden. It was pride. Made man disobey God because he thought he could be his equal. And what happened was he introduced duality. Now, instead of unity and one God and one creation, it's him and us, you and ours, me and mine, and you and your. We got to get away from that. We got to get back to we, us, one, because we're all in this together. And I'll tell you something. I didn't understand people when I was younger, as a really young person, but I studied people all my life because I wanted to understand what made them tick. And I got to tell you something. We all have inside here a space. We've got to take that. The society spreads us out all over the place to a million fractures. We got to absorb that and take it inside into a tight ball of light. That's where God resides. And each one of us has that. And we got to see it in each other. So we walk down the street, we see a stranger. We can't look at him as an enemy or as someone to avoid. We got to look at him as someone to love, seeing a reflection of what's inside. He's got it too. So my feeling is that I've learned to love people. It took a long time. They scared me at first, but when you really get to know people and you really get to connect, it's like a miracle. It really is. And it gives so much meaning to this existence we're in. That's the meaning. That's what it is. Being authentic, realizing that it's a brotherhood of man, and we all want to take you higher. We all can get there. We just got to put our hands together every day and do it.
Beautiful. Really beautiful. Like, I'm going to end it right there because that was like a perfect ending, especially for a podcast that's called SolFul Connections.
Yes.
So I'll take this part, off, but I'll end it there. Yeah. Beautiful.
Well, thank you. But it's what I feel. And I knew when I met you, I said, there's something. God has given me so many lessons, and he's directed my life. 50 years ago, I had a motorcycle accident, and I was out drinking, which I don't do today. I still ride motorcycles, but I respect them. And back then, I drank too much, and I was in a period where I thought, oh, I got the answers now, and this is all a game, and it doesn't mean anything. So when I ride up this crooked street I live on, a couple of miles every day, and it's got these telephone poles leaning in, I'm going to see how close I can get at 50 miles an hour without actually hitting them. A couple of times I chipped off splinters into my arm and stuff like that. One particular night, I'm playing that same stupid game, and I hit gravel, and the bike slid out from under me, and I remember hanging on to it and seeing sparks flying right into a telephone pole. And I sat up, and it was like a fountain. And I should have been, by rights, I should have went. Yeah. I went through the tunnel, the whole thing that people tell you. And it's true. But I heard my buddy calling me that was following me in a car. You okay? What's going on? Hang on. And he took me to the hospital. And they sewed me up that night. But I had a lot of, so.
Yeah.
God slapped me and said, wake up. And ever since that, I said, there's a reason he didn't take me then. What is that reason?
Yeah.
It's always been in the back of my mind. And I still think there's more that he intends for me to do.
Yeah.
So I keep writing. I keep talking to people. I did the novel. I'm in the process of rewriting that novel because it was done 20 years ago, The Closing Song. And I started of course, there's a lot of questions that it raised that I have answers for now. And I have another page on Woodstock I started a few years back called Flip Me the Peace Sign. And it's a safe haven for about 9,000 people that are peace oriented, that send in posters and say peaceful things. And it's a nice place. And it's grown from, a few hundred to almost 10,000.
And what is that?
It's called Flip Me the Peace Sign. And it's a page on Woodstock. If you put in Facebook, if you put in a search on Facebook, Flip Me the Peace Sign, you'll get there. And I have an administrator, so it's very well doctored. We don't have profane stuff on there. I wanted a PG thing. I didn't want anything to do with drugs, or I didn't want that element in there. I just wanted peace, and that's what it is.
It's so interesting because you made me want to go back and watch the documentary on Woodstock, because I remember my one daughter studying, not the daughter you met, another one, studying, she had a whole course on.
Yes.
And a lot of it was the counterculture. That's why I asked about that, because I never really understood what people were saying, honestly, when they would talk about that phrase. I didn't really understand. And I think it's because I came just after that. So I didn't exist in the time where
you got the fallout.
I got the fallout, right? And
one thing I should say is that it's a sad thing. Artie never got behind the Woodstock 2, Woodstock 3. Those are abominations.
Really? Oh, yeah.
There's a Woodstock 3 movie they just put out where the kids were on a tarmac and it was 120 degrees and they didn't even have water to drink, and they charged $500.
I remember, yes.
It was profanity, and the sad thing is that a lot of people say, "Oh, I saw the movie. Now I know what Woodstock." And that wasn't Woodstock.
Yeah.
Woodstock was a beautiful ceramic of many different types of people, young people, but many different types: white, black, philosophers, dropouts, military people, peace people, every extreme into this beautiful mosaic. Okay. It wasn't just a bunch of hippies taking drugs. Now there was drug use, but that wasn't the predominant message of Woodstock. The message was love, peace, and inclusion. Include everybody. Okay. And that's what it was about.
I mean, I think honestly, you give a really beautiful illustration of that, because when you speak artistically.
Oh, thank you. I didn't realize that, but all right.
You do. So what happens is you have a visual way of speaking.
Okay.
So when you're talking, I'm like, oh, I hadn't seen it that way. I can actually picture.
I try to paint a picture when I talk.
You do. You do a really, really good job. That's why I was so curious, because even when you talk about the way that music impacts you and the way that even the look of the sky, you can remember that and it impacted you. It's very artistic, almost maybe why you were able, even as a kid, to kind of disassociate and watch and go, yeah, this isn't working for me.
Yeah, right.
It's that same observational aspect that you have as just a human being.
And I always had a desire to share what I found out. My brother says you told great, I didn't even remember this. He said, you told great stories to us when we were kids. We always loved your stories. But what I would do is that when something seemed profound to me, I'd want to share it,
Yes, I do know. I mean, yeah, I have to say, because I feel the very same way about, if I discover something, I want to share it. If I'm curious about it, I just want to know more, and I don't have the chip that stops me from asking. And I think you really should consider, if you already don't, a podcast, because it's just so easy now.
I'm not sure I have enough information for a podcast.
Yeah. So first of all, a podcast, it's all the stuff that you're just blogging about. I mean, You
Yeah,
don't have to do, I do a lot of interviews or group discussions, but you can just talk. You can just literally sit there and talk, and you can go, you know what? So whatever you do your blog about or your
yeah,
Facebook post, you can talk. Today, after this election, I was thinking I just want to hit record and talk because I have some thoughts, and actually I did I did record. I have lots of podcasts. I like to record them all, and then I put them out every Tuesday, and I like to have them lined up so that I'm not chasing,
yes. Well, I was very upset with the election. I thought it was going to go the other way. Not that I'm a liberal, because what happened to my later life, which we didn't get into, might be a little interesting. I wanted to get in touch with not only my Woodstock roots, but I also wanted to get in touch with my spirituality. And I began to meditate. I've been meditating for years, and being in the here and now, and being aware, and so forth and so on. And I was brought up in the Christian environment. So I said, there's a lot of things I like about Christianity. Maybe I didn't like the particular way it was presented. Maybe it could be done better, maybe not. Who am I to judge? But what I wanted to do was get as close to the historical Jesus that was possible. So here I am, and I'm driving back to work at a particular job. I live in Doylestown, and the job was in Langhorne job. And every day I'm passing this little chapel. And it's a small chapel, reminded me of the one in Woodstock. And I said, that's a connection. So anyway, I pull in, and I hadn't been in church in a long time. I raised my kids Catholic, but I didn't go. Okay, I didn't practice. And I felt something going on again. And I started meditating, and I felt really good about being there. And I looked up, and I noticed the cross was a little different, had a little slant on the bottom. And one day a priest comes out. He's wearing a collar, and he's obviously a priest. And I didn't know if I was at a Pentecostal or Catholic church.
Right.
So he comes out and he says, what are you doing here? I said, well, something drew me here. He says, well, I'm Father so-and-so. I'm the pastor. And I said, oh, nice to meet you. I said, what is this place? He says, it's St. Mark's Orthodox Church in America. I said, what's that all about? He said, well, you were raised a Roman Catholic. There's a whole nother branch of the church that is called Orthodox, that because of historical reasons, when the Roman Empire broke up, Rome had one half and Constantinople had the other half. And they developed two different liturgies. But the Orthodox had the original church in Jerusalem. They haven't changed the prayer to this day. They follow the first 7 ecumenical councils. And we've got a pretty good spin on things, but we're the original guys. Now, the Catholics say they broke away in 1054. They say they did. Doesn't matter. But I said, oh, here's an opportunity to get really back to ancient Christianity. So I said, next thing he says to me that really hooked me, he says, that's the chapel and that's the rectory. That's where I live with my wife and 6 kids. I said, you're my kind of priest.
That's right. You could have been a priest. I said you could have been a priest.
Yeah, so we had
if you were in this,
buddy, my dog is barking. So we had, I said, you know what? I want to learn about this. So for a year, I sat with him in the basement of that church. And I'll never forget the first day he opened the door. I walked in and I saw the icons, and I smelt incense for the first time in 40 years. And I saw the iconostasis in front of the altar, which is like a doorway with, saints on it and so forth. So, and I felt at home. I mean, something clicked, because what I had lost with Catholicism was that sense of mystical.
Yeah.
When I knew the Latin, okay, that was mysterious and beautiful because I knew the words and it was like singing. But when they went to English and they went to Kumbaya and all the transitions, something was lost. But now, wow, incense, the colors, the reds, the blues, these icons. This is beautiful. And it gave me that sense. So I started studying for about a year. And then oh gosh, who's the guy that was Lazarus Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
I stood in front of the congregation. They opened my shirt and they chrismated me with oil, sign of the cross, all the senses, hands, stuff like that. And I joined that church. And the nice thing about it is the liturgy that they have, St. John Chrysostom. When you listen to those words, you can really get into it because it's asking for mercy, for mercy, for mercy. It's asking for help. And you feel a sense that an icon is a window, okay? You get a sense that the whole church is an icon that's connecting you directly to that spiritual world. I get lost in the liturgy. And I remember that when I went to Catholic services, they were 20 minutes, 40 minutes. You look at your watch, you want to get out of there. You cut people off in the parking lot, swear at them. These liturgies are an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Oh.
And you want more. You don't want to leave.
Wow.
So for me, it was a place to go. And it was a home. Even though I went through this whole thing, I got that connection again.
You returned back to that.
Yeah, I'm still open. I'm not the type of person that says I can't stand the church that says we've got the only answer.
I agree with you. Yeah.
And the nice thing about this place, about the Orthodox concept, we're not saying that we can restrict God's salvation in any way. We are finite beings. God is infinite. If he wants to save people a different way, we can't tell him not to. And he probably has his own way to do things elsewhere. So we're open to that. We think we have a good handle on it, but we do not say that we have the only.
This is the only way. That's great.
That when I heard that closed the deal.
It resonated. Yeah.
That closed the deal.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate that you came on here. I'm going to follow up and I'll let you know exactly when this will be out. At some point, what I'm going to start doing for, irregularly is I might have like virtual gatherings just to invite people because I'm thinking I've just met so many interesting people. I mean, and they have every kind of story. Just a couple of days ago, interviewed a woman, Belinda Green. Her story, it's a horrifying story because her daughter was murdered. She was basically executed. But Belinda just decided, you know what? It was gang members who killed her. And she's trying to get to young boys before and just to try to understand how they could do this to her daughter. And then I have just somebody who she came on and she just talked about perfectionism and she's just a supervisor of a township in Bucks County. And so it's just like all of these really interesting people that I think, wow, it would be so great to even just, and then you guys could always just go, hey, let's go have coffee if you're local, or let's meet up virtually if you're not.
Yeah,
because I have so just
one thing I forgot to even mention that was really essential to this whole story was my relationship with Frank. Frank was the guy that brought me out, right? He was my only true friend that I ever had, my closest friend. If you have a friend that you totally say this is the one.
Yeah.
But what happened was once I went into the car business and he went back into the woods, we diverged. And the reason I wrote the book was because what happened to him sort of brought this on. Because I wanted to tell his story the same as I tell mine. And the book is actually a conversation between the two of us. And he committed suicide. There was one time when we were hanging out before I went into the seminary, he attempted it, but didn't complete it. I get a call the night before I'm supposed to go in for psychological testing. And it's Frank. And I knew he was doing drugs. And I was concerned. and he calls me, and I knew he was psychotic to a certain degree, if that's the right term. And he says, I'm in Sleepy Hollow Cemetery and I'm taking a long trip. And I just wanted to say goodbye to you because you're my closest friend. And to me, alarms are going off. I said, oh, something's terrible's happening here. So I hitchhike all the way to Tarrytown from my hometown in Irvington. Couldn't tell my parents what was going on. And for an hour and a half, I'm searching through Sleepy Hollow Cemetery at 11 o'clock at night, trying to find Frank. Finally, down by the Headless Horseman Bridge, there's a creek that goes down. I hear his dog, Billy. Billy's barking because he sensed me. And I go down, and there's Frank leaning against a tree. I said, Frank, what the hell's going on? And he's got a bottle, not this skinny, but about this wide. He's putting stuff in his mouth. And I said, what are you doing? I'm thinking, here he's taking drugs, was he not? And they were aspirins. And he had finished a family-sized bottle of aspirins. And I said, why? He said, well, I looked at death. I looked into the mausoleum when I was tripping one time. And death is really beautiful. And this world is so awful. And my parents really don't love me. And there's no love in the world. And we're going to hell in a handbasket. That's why I had a vasectomy. Didn't want to bring a kid in. And here I am. And I'm trying to give him every reason not to do this. And I felt so, what's the word, incapable. So I felt so
helpless,
because I couldn't convince him.
Yeah.
And then I took the bottle away. There was only one or two. And he got mad at me. He says, I thought you were the one person that understood this, because we went way out there on psychological conversations.
Yeah.
You're one person that understands what's going on here, and you should accept it, and you should make this peaceful for me. I said, no, it's wrong. And he took out he had another little bottle of Addison or Bear or something. He starts taking it. I get that away from him. And I said, Frank, what you're doing really isn't fair to you or anybody else. I have to be in Manhattan tomorrow to take a battery of psychological tests to get entry into the seminar. And you got me out here with you. And I finally convinced him to walk out of the seminary and up on Beekman Avenue because he had a car. I didn't have a car. We used to ride around in his car. And after about an hour or so, I convinced him to drive me home. I said, look, you do what you want. I said, I really should call your parents and tell them. And you're putting me through a lot of turmoil over this. And he wouldn't let me. And to this day, well, the way things turned out, I went home and I tried to fall asleep at like 2 o'clock in the morning, got up at 6, took a subway into New York City, sat there for hours, filling out these psychological tests. Somebody's after me, yes or no. Somebody wants to kill me, yes. I passed the test somehow. I shouldn't have.
Whoa, right.
So that blew over. And that was the main cause of our division. I said, screw this. I'm not going to go through this again.
Right.
He woke his parents up that night and they took him to the hospital. They pumped his stomach. I knew none of this until I got back into town and called him and he told me what happened. So from that point, he went into the woods. He married a girl later on in life and moved to Texas. He was always a good carpenter. So he got a carpenter's job out there. And I stayed in the car business. So the irony is I get a job in a dealership that for the first time, they're putting automated computers into the dealership and they're putting inventory online. This is back in the 80s, I guess. And it was very primitive. So they wanted to send everybody out to Texas to the regional headquarters to learn how to work the computer and inventory and so forth and so on. So I called Frank up. I said, Frank, guess what? In 2 weeks, I'll be in Houston. That's where you live. I said, maybe we can get together. He said, oh, that would be great. I go out, I get involved in these meetings, they go late. I really can't get to see Frank. So that weekend, I was disappointed. him and his two dogs go into the woods. He climbs a pine tree. And he should have known better because a pine tree, the limbs are not very strong. And he's in there hunting. And he's on the top of this pine tree, and the limb breaks. And he falls down. And he severs his spinal cord. Here's a guy that was in the woods all this time, and now he's on his elbows 100 yards or so trying to get to his car. He finally got help, but he was a paraplegic at that point. For 5 years after that, he was in a wheelchair with his wife in Texas. And I can't blame her. She was a sweet girl. I met her a few times. But, after 5 years, maybe she had needs he couldn't fulfill, maybe. I'm just speculating. So I don't know what happened, but one night she came home and he shot her with a shotgun.
He shot her?
He shot her, and then he blew his own head off.
My gosh.
When I heard that, you can imagine what that did to me. The guilt of not going to see him that weekend, the fact that maybe that accident wouldn't have happened.
I know, but
So-
firsthand how things happen. I mean, there's
So
no
here's
way.
what the funeral's a few weeks later, or a week later, whatever, and we're in Valhalla, New York. Do you know where that is? That's outside of
Horrible. Yeah.
White Plains.
Yeah.
Just,
Yep.
So compile that with the fact that I was drinking, things were not going well. I was becoming existentially depressed. I thought I was going to lose everything. I sat down and I wrote this book. And it was like I stuck my finger down my throat and just let it all come out.
Wow.
And I wrote it in a frank style. I didn't care. And this was before computers were, I had nothing to work with but a simple computer that did one page.
Wow.
And I wrote it, and then I would write it, and I'd do a few chapters, throw it in the drawer, go back to work, come back to it a few months later. I don't know, think from the first time I started writing it out before his accident, I was using a pen and paper. And so anyway, this went on for like beginning to end 5 years. So finally I get it I self-publish, and I get it into a format that tells a story. It tells a story really well, I think. But I didn't have time to edit it. I couldn't pay for an editor. There's a few mistakes in it. There, T-H-E-R-E instead of T-H-E-I-R.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I said, you know what? I don't care. The story's more important than having this thing 100% grammatically correct. And, you take a guy like, oh gosh, who was his name? Wrote a whole book on the road.
Oh, Jack Kerouac, or however you say his name.
He wrote it on toilet paper or whatever. So now let me put it out there. Then the other thing that really contributed to this was I was so impressed with Catcher in the Rye when I read it in high school. And like Holden Caulfield, I was in a private school. And, it was the same situation. And I had the same different, but existential, I was really at the point where, man, Frank did it. Should I do it? Of course, I didn't get there. But I went through such a severe depression that I said, the book's got to go out. I got to write it. And once I did, it was like a catharsis. It was like, put it all out there, because I was trying to hide all of this from the world. And so I think it was the best thing I ever did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I think sometimes that kind of authenticity, like you've said, that vulnerability and the sharing of your story. We are living these stories that need to be told to one another.
Yep.
So I think that's, what you recognized. And I'm sure that's the value of that book, and also the value to you and to those reading it. But anyway, well, I've taken so much of your time. I so appreciate
I took
you.
too much of your time. Don't mention it. I'm
No,
sorry.
I'm grateful.
I didn't expect
follow
to
up.
go.
What was that?
I didn't expect to keep you this long. I'm sorry.
You didn't keep me. I am grateful.
Feel free to edit it. if you need to edit it, do whatever. I trust you 100%. Do
Thank you
whatever
so
you think
much.
will make a good story for your
I
me.
I appreciate it. I
Yeah.
appreciate it. And I'll be in touch. And I just
Okay.
want to repeat that I'm so thankful.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm so lucky that I met you that day.
It's just more of those happenstances that you just
Yeah.
think, okay, well, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yep. I mean, my daughter heard your story and she actually typed it up and sent it to a friend. She thought it was so interesting.
Your daughter's such a beautiful girl. She
Thank
really
you so
is.
much. Thank
Yeah.
you. Okay. Well, thanks again.
Okay. Gotta let you go.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.